Thank you so much for joining another video. Today we talk about solvency ratios. I've made 3 other videos, one for activity ratios, one for profitability ratios, one for liquidity ratios, and this is the one for solvency ratios. Why do we look at solvency ratios? We look at solvency ratios because they measure the relative amount of debt in a firm's capital structure and whether the company has enough earnings and cash flow to pay interest, fixed charges as lease payments and so on as they come due. Yeah, quite important. If the company cannot pay interest and has not enough earnings to settle those, then the company is insolvent. Yeah, so quite important. The more debt a company has, that's why we look at some of the debt ratios, the more interest needs to be paid and the higher the pressure on the company to pay those interest payments. Good, let's get started. Debt ratios. We look at debt ratios and we look at coverage ratios. They are both solvency ratios. The main difference is debt ratios. We really look at the capital structure. We mainly look at the balance sheet to get an idea how much debt compared to assets, how much debt compared to equity, or how much debt compared to the total capital provided does the company have, because a higher number of debt compared to total capital means the company has more financial leverage, means there are potentially more interest payments to be made, and the more pressure there is. When we look at coverage ratios, here we look more at EBIT, sometimes EBITDA, sometimes free cash flow figures to see whether the company can pay those obligations. Yeah, so both are quite useful and important, but let's go through step by step. Debt to assets ratio, sometimes called total debt to asset ratio, is total debt to total assets. Here, whenever I talk about total debt, I mean interest-bearing short-term and long-term debt. Yeah, so whenever there's interest involved, we include this into debt. What else? Total debt, very important. The higher the number, the more debt does it have. So debt to ratio measures the percentage of total assets financed with debt. For example, if you have a debt to asset ratio of 40%, that indicates that 40% of the company's assets are financed with debt. Yeah, higher debt, higher financial risk, and weaker solvency. Same applies here. Here we take total capital, total debt and shares equity is total capital as the right-hand side, measures the percentage of a company's capital represented by debt. Same, higher number, generally higher financial risk. Last one, debt to equity, again, looks at total debt, but only compared to your shareholders' equity. Again, how you interpret different ways. One way would be that's the amount of debt capital relative to equity capital. The interpretation is similar to before. Financial leverage ratio is really average total assets over shareholders' equity, sometimes also called just leverage ratios, measures the amount of total assets supported for each one money unit of equity. So if you have a leverage ratio of 3, means that each $1 of equity supports $3 of total assets. The higher the financial leverage ratio, the more leveraged the company is. Yeah, and basically similar to what we see before. Some caveat is that here I used average. In practice, sometimes you use ending values for both, because sometimes you want to get a snapshot, okay, what does the capital structure look like at the very end of the year, for example. And then because both are used point in time, you can do the same. Good. What else? Total or net debt over EBITDA. Debt to EBITDA ratio basically estimates how many years it would take to repay total debt based on earnings before income, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Yeah. We use EBITDA as an approximation of operating cash flow sometimes. And this measure is used in debt covenants, for example, between issuers and debt investors. Yeah. So another one, again, if the number is higher, here you have more debt compared to EBITDA, it actually would take more years to repay your total debt. Yeah. Good. Coverage ratio here again. How much cash inflow supports your cash outflow. Here in the denominator, you can see in both formulas what you need to pay. And in the numerator, you see what money you have available. Here, a higher number is actually better because you have higher coverage, higher buffer. You have more money available to do payment. Here in those formulas, interest coverage, we use EBIT. This is the money, earnings before interest, taxes, to pay our interest obligations. Here we use EBIT plus lease payments, but these are the lease payments that we get if we lease out something. And these are the lease payments. These are not the same lease payments. These are the lease payments that we need to pay if we lease something. Yeah. So this is lease payments, lease income, lease outflow, lease expenses, and interest payments. So again, a higher number means more coverage. There are additional formulas. Maybe I do another video purely on coverage ratios where you use free cash flow to be very specific how much free cash flow is available to pay your interest, sometimes used to pay your interest plus paying down your debt service ratios, and so on. So there are more, especially when we talk about private equity, leverage buyout cases. It's really important to really understand how much free cash flow can we generate to cover our debt obligation, be it interest payments and principal repayments. Yeah, but these are the main ones. Again, mostly focused here, first part on the balance sheet, to give you an idea about the capital structure compared to other companies, but also compared to maybe previous years. Thank you so much for listening. I see you in another video. Bye-bye.